Welcome back to the Roundtable. I'm NYJohn, your host. With me today, of course, the Capitalist and El Prez. And we've been discussing the prelims thus far. We made our way through the entirety of Group A, and it's time to move on to Group B. And you cannot talk about Group B without talking about the juggernauts themselves, Alliance. Alliance are undefeated at 14-0 thus far in the competition, and they look pretty unbeatable. What are your impressions thus far on the team and what they've been able to accomplish? These are not easy games to win out. The Capitalists, why don't you go ahead and talk about Alliance?
Honestly, Alliance, I mean, what a team. The fact that they did not drop a single game. Now, there were some games that were close, and arguably one game that they should have dropped. But the fact that they went through the whole entire group stage without dropping a single game is just a feat unto itself. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that they're a clincher for the finals. It doesn't mean they're going to go all the way and win the whole entire thing or even necessarily make it to the finals. There are some very, very strong teams that they're going to have to go up against before they get to that point. But Alliance, I mean, they are the odds-on favorite right now.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. El Prez, thoughts on Alliance? Are they beatable, or are they just going to go ahead and sweep through, accomplish what LGD couldn't last year?
Well, they're definitely beatable. I don't think any team in this tournament is going to be unbeatable. That said, Alliance is definitely making a very strong push for that title with their 14-0 record in the group stages. But even last year, we saw teams with impeccable group stage records, CLG, Team Complexity, just get completely dominated once they got out of the group stages and get dropped down almost immediately and being eliminated before even a top 8 finish for some of those teams. So definitely still possible that Alliance does underperform. I don't know. Alliance is another one of those teams that tends to have like a very kind of strict way that they play, particularly because Bulldog has a limited hero pool. But yeah, you know, it seems like most teams haven't been able to take advantage of that weakness the way they have been for teams like Mouse or MEFC.
Yeah, that's a good point. Bulldog does have a more limited pool. We're going to go ahead and take out the clip that it was against Tong Fu where Alliance almost slipped up. I mean, we can see this Roche fight. Tong Fu, we're about 45 minutes in the game or so. They're going for the Roche, and it's a back and forth between them and Alliance. They couldn't figure out who was going to initiate, if someone was going to just try and commit and kill off Roshan and get the Aegis, or if instead they were just going to jostle for it for a longer period of time. But this is a point in the game where Tong Fu decide to take this fight. They charge in here in a moment. Loda's going on Roshan, so this is the perfect time for them to engage. He does end up getting the Aegis, but you can see Hero stop dropping. Mu comes in, gets off a huge Sonic Wave. They're able to kill off 4 heroes and then drop the Aegis. A huge RP as well from King J. And at this point in the game, everyone thought that Tong Fu were going to win this match and take at least one win off of Alliance, but somehow at the end of this game, Alliance was able to right the ship, and they were able to just make their way back into it. I mean, it's almost inexplicable to a degree because after having that big of a lead, they have an Alchemist. They have even Empower coming out from the Magnus, of course, with the RP. I think they definitely let the opportunity slip through their hands, but I think that could be the blueprint to beat Alliance in the future. So let's go ahead and move on to a team that is not unbeaten, but definitely impressive, and that is Tong Fu. We saw how they almost were able to take down Alliance in that game in particular, but coming to the tournament, they were definitely odds-on favorites coming out of the Asian region, and they have definitely slipped up at points, dropping 2 games to Liquid along the way, but they have enough victories to compensate for that. What do you think about Tong Fu, El Prez, and their performance thus far? Has it been underwhelming, or has it been just what you expected out of them?
Well, honestly, when I was looking at Group B, right, my top 2 finish I thought was going to be Alliance and IG, and then the last 2 slots were just complete and total toss-ups, just because how strong Group B was, I thought. So I'm not surprised that Tong Fu made it to the top 4. I am surprised that that they tied basically 4th second with the rest of the other players, but yeah, I think they've just been playing phenomenally. The fact that they were able to push Alliance so far is just a testament to how well they're capable of playing. That said, they do tend to have some consistency issues at times. They did drop 2 games against Liquid, not saying that's necessarily like the worst thing ever. Liquid is a very strong team, but I feel like they can probably tighten up some of their play a little bit and just make it a little bit more consistent, and they stand a very good chance as well.
Yeah, the Capitalists, what do you think about the odds of Tong Fu in best of 3s? Because we saw that was a best of 2 against the Alliance. They almost took down 1 game from them. They seem like a team that can definitely adapt to playstyles of their opponents. Do you think they'll be better off in those situations?
You know, I do. I think that Tongfu is a team. I think the Eastern scene as a whole operates better in best of threes. There's a little bit less pressure going into game one, and as well as being able to operate with just the knowledge that you have that extra game if necessary, if you do drop a game, to be able to take the whole entire thing. I think that the Eastern scene as well operates much better. Tongfu, you know, they were one of my teams that Tongfu and Fnatic were the two teams that I really thought were going to surprise people and do well. They didn't do as well as I expected. I expected them to take out both IG and place second in their group. They didn't quite make that. I mean, they tied, you know, and so they kind of
technically
did,
got second.
Yeah, technically they made second, but I expected them to have, you know, not necessarily having tied, but just completely taken, only dropping a couple games, you know, against teams like Alliance. I think that they were going to surprise a lot of people. And I still think they have that opportunity going into the upper brackets. They're obviously, with that tiebreaker, they're sitting second. And because of that, they have a really good matchup in game one. I think they're going to do well in the upper brackets. But, you know, I think they're looking at top four. I don't think they're going to go much farther than that. I think one of the giants of the Chinese scene are going to go a little bit farther, whether that's IG, DK, even LGD is definitely in there. It's just, I think they need a little bit more time. They've got some really good players. Banana and King J are some of my favorite players to watch in the Chinese scene, but they just have not shown that dominating performance. Yes, they had a really good show in Super League, and that was great, and I loved watching them perform that well, but they haven't been dominating in the past as heavily. So I think that while we may see some upsets from them, just the marathon of running all of these games against such strong teams, eventually they are going to drop down to the lower bracket and then come up against that situation where they are going to get kicked out. But I do think they're going to make top four before that point.
Yeah, I mean, last year in TI2 in lower brackets, there was almost no expectations for Tongfu to do well. They came in through the qualifiers, of course, and they still made a splash. I mean, they made their way to top 8, and that was a year where they had no expectations. But previously in TI1, a lot of these players were on Tyloo, and that was a team that a lot of people expected the world of, and they disappointed there. So if there's a pattern, they can definitely fall victim to disappointment again in this tournament. But thus far, they've been pretty solid. I mean, you got to give credit to Moo. He's another one of those underrated solos that people don't think of when you think of Eastern Dota. I mean, he's been around for quite some time now, and he's definitely performing well. Let's go ahead and make our way to the next team in line. And of course, Capitalist mentioned this, El Prez mentioned this, a three-way tie for that second spot, and tiebreaker was determined because Tongfu had a 2-0 victory against IG and a 2-0 victory against Orange, so pretty decisive that they deserved the 2 spot. But IG somehow finagled their way into that 3rd spot. They were so close to falling down into losers bracket, which could have been terrifying for other teams, honestly. But IG, a team that's been looking out of shape for quite some time now, they make their way up to winners, and all of a sudden, this is a real threat. What do you think, El Prez, about IG in this tournament? I mean, they haven't been as good as they were in the past, but they're still playing pretty solid Dota.
Yeah, they're definitely playing very solid. I don't think they're really playing as well as they did in comparison to last year. That much is obvious. But that said, it was very close for them. If they actually even dropped one game against Liquid yesterday, they would have been in the losers bracket, and it would have been very tough for them to get out. So, personally, I think that's a little bit disappointing. I really wanted Liquid to get into the top 4.
I think we all did.
Yeah, that said, I knew that they probably weren't going to make it all the way, but yeah, IG, a little bit disappointing. They definitely could be playing so much better than this. We even saw that one game where Lumi was talking about how he always wanted to see Chuan's Treon farming for another 40 minutes. and I do think that's kind of the what IG is kind of falling apart on. It's really Chuan is making all the right plays, but then sometimes some of the other supports aren't doing as well, and Joe doesn't get the farm. Ferrari sometimes doesn't, you know, execute the mid as perfectly as he should be, considering the caliber of player that he really is. So
yeah, a lot of the mid heroes though now are not as dynamic as they were in the past. I mean, last year we think about Rubik, who really determined team fights himself by stealing abilities. Queen of Pain was prominent. She's still on and off now. Puck is a little bit faded, but heroes like Dragonite, they're not as flashy as those other heroes, but he is a common pick. Alchemist isn't quite as flashy, so that could be a theme for players like Dendi and Ferrari, where they're not going to be the focal point of a lot of these games. They're just going to have to be consistent to get their teams through and let other people take over. Of course, Joe is an amazing carry player, and the supports are pretty much unmatched on IG in terms of their top level caliber. But it's worth noting that they just are still a little bit sporadic. I mean, it's tough to evaluate them because they are not playing the typical Dota that we expected out of them from last year. But of course, let's move on to the fourth team. The final team that tied for this second position ended up with the fourth spot, and that's Orange. Orange, a team that in day one that started off 2-4. They looked out of it, and of course, the moment that I switched Mushi to my bench, they somehow came back in terms of fantasy points and record in the prelims. That is very unfortunate for me, but really, Orange turned it on in game 2 and game 3. El Prez, how did they do it?
Mushi. It's almost always Mushi when you're talking about Orange. It's if Mushi's having a bad day, Orange is having a bad day. If Mushi's having a good day, Orange is having a very good day. And it was the problem before, and it's still the problem now. If you can beat Mushi in mid, you stand a very good chance of winning the whole game.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I think it's worth noting, too, that Net and Extinct are looking like one of the best support duos in the tournament right now. Am I right on that fact, Capitalist?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that while Mushi is such a prominent player, and it's in many ways similar to DK, where you want to be able to talk about just one player burning, right? You just want to talk about that one player and focus on him. Mushi is definitely the heart and soul of this team, but he does have a very good supporting cast. You're definitely right that the dual combo right there, they are the kings of support when it comes to the Southeast Asian scene and even the Eastern scene in general. I think that while they do suffer a little bit in some of their carry playing, and as they start going into some of the later game, I don't feel that they operate nearly as well as a lot of the Eastern scene. I think they have adapted well to the aggression that the meta scene has sort of gone into, big focus on mid-game team fights, and I was expecting them to do really, really well in their group. But I think you're right. They're faltering a little bit, and I'm not really sure. I mean, obviously a lot of it rides on Mushi, as El Prez said. I think they just really need Extinct to KYXY just to turn it on. I think we need to see those players really be the deciding factor, because it can't all ride on one player. Eventually you are going to have that bad game. And as much as the supporting cast is doing well, setting up Mushi and setting up Extinct and KYXY for good support and a good mid game, they just aren't performing as well. They aren't making those big plays that you expect to see in a top 4 team.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder if there's still that surprise potential, because in the past, a lot of people have regarded Orange as that really wild card. You don't know what's going to come of them. They can take any game on any given Sunday kind of mentality. But without having Yamata there as kind of that rock to fall back on for Mushi when he's not doing quite as well, there hasn't been that second player to step up, like you mentioned, Capitalist, and really it's going to have to be that if they want to survive, not only in the tournament, but of course in the winner's bracket, where they're going to have quite the matchup that we'll get to talk about later. But let's keep going. The fifth team, of course, in Group B, Liquid. And Liquid, oh my god, they started off so well. They were 4-2 on day one, I believe, but it came down to a point where they controlled their own destiny. They had to win 2 games on Sunday, I believe. Nope, yesterday on Monday. And they would have made their way to winners. But of course, those 2 games were not the easiest games ever, considering their opponent were the defending champions in Invictus Gaming. I mean, between these 2 American teams, it's heartbreak on both sides. They both controlled their own destiny on Monday. What are your impressions from Liquid so far in this tournament? Can they come back from here, Capitalist?
I think they can. I think that I love watching both Dignitas and Liquid, not just because, Go USA and all that nonsense, but it's just the fact that they are pretty innovative teams. They are really, really innovative teams, and that is both a strength and a weakness. When you go into your drafting and you're drafting so differently than every other team out there, yes, there are some serious strengths, and you have you are able to go into the game with sort of that surprise factor, and you have opposite teams, the opposing teams going, okay, we're not used to facing up some of these heroes. We're not used to dealing with Ursa every single game or something like that. And that is a strength in some regards, but it's also a weakness. You can't fully flesh out those strategies when you're trying to hold it back, when you're trying to reveal, oh, we're going to be running Ursa every single game. you can only practice that so much, and when the pressure is on, you're going to be making some mistakes, and you don't have that much experience to fall back on. While typical meta pickups that you see over and over and over, where you play those in every single tournament, you do have the experience of going, okay, when we're in this specific situation, what did we do last time to succeed? And Liquid doesn't have that to fall back on. I feel that while their drafting is really great, and I love watching it, it can be a weakness of theirs. And if they can surprise teams further, if they have more strategies that they're going to be running with that are going to surprise team and put them on that back foot, Team Liquid with their aggression, they're going to keep them going, and they're going to knock teams out of the tournament left and right. But it's just a question of what do they have in their drafting pool? What is left?
El Prez, we heard Capitals bring up the Ursa pick. Is this a hero that they could really just run with and thrive with? Of course, Cap mentioned that game after game, it's just not going to work because it's going to become repetitive. Someone's going to solve the puzzle. But as of so far, they've done pretty well with this. Do you think they should continue to dip into their secrets, or should they stick with the kind of absurd strategies they've rolled with so far that have been somewhat successful?
Well, Ursa, I definitely think is capable of being a top tier competitive pick, given the current mid dynamic, right? You're seeing heroes still Magnus, still DK, and Ursa stomps both of them in mid. Like, that's not even a question. It's in any melee versus melee fight, Ursa will almost always win with the changes to his various swipes. So I do think that Ursa is still very capable of moving on. That said, I think he functions way better in multi-core lineups than anything else, and I do think that's still one of Liquid's strengths, that they do have such strong multi-core players between Koro, TC, and Bulba. And that's really what makes it happen. Honestly, when I look at Liquid, though, I think their weaknesses right now, as this team, they lack a lot of LAN experience, right? They had G1 League, but they didn't do very well there. They played at DreamHack Summer. They didn't really do that well there either. So this is, they really needed to get more LAN experience, and they really don't have that yet. That said, they still stand a pretty good chance, but right now it's looking like this is just going to be a repeat for Fluff and stuff, IX, Mike, and TC, and they're probably going to end up getting eliminated in the losers bracket like they did last year's Complexity.
I mean, that would be unfortunate. I think a lot of people want to see this team go far. They have a lot of good personalities. We just had IX Mike on the screen, of course, one of the fan favorites. And obviously, this is a team that's comprised of a lot of people that are prominent in NA. I mean, when it was first coming around, when people were talking and speculating about what the new team would be after Complexity disbanded after TI2, people were saying this is going to be an all-star team, and it certainly looked like that for quite some time. I believe in January they were on a 13-game win streak, or a 13-series win streak, something absurd to that effect. But right now, they need to find that consistency, and I think that's the same case with Dignitas. NA needs consistency, which it just can't get quite yet, and when you're playing in the best of ones in the losers bracket, if you do not have consistency, you're going to end up going home. I think that's the end of the story, honestly. Let's go ahead and move on, though, and we can look at the final three teams from Group B. We see LGD Int finds itself in the bottom three. This is a little bit surprising for a lot of people because of the fact that Int, of course, had been practicing in China. They had been building up to this point for quite some time now. They also had some success in China after Chinese New Year's. I believe it was G League or Ace Dota League. I forget which one, but they came in second to that, to IG, of course. Then after them, we see VP and Rattlesnake, two big wildcard teams. People didn't really have a beat on them coming into the tournament. Rattlesnake beat Quantic to make their way in, but looked overall sporadic once again in the group stages. VP, much of the same. What are your impressions? Are any of these teams a risk going forward? Int, of course, is a little bit different than VP and Rattlesnake, who seem to have big similarities. Capitals, what do you think of these three teams in general, though?
You know, I mean, some people are going to hate on me for this, but I never expected LGDN to go far. Even when they were picked up as a team, I think that just the whole entire process of going about it, picking players, basically whoever wants to go to China and work in this boot camp, it's the whole idea was there that people thought that the Eastern scene was so strong that just by the virtue of being there and playing against those teams every single day, that they were going to become a really, really strong team, and they were going to be a strong Western team that was going to represent us in the East, and they were going to go really far in some of these tournaments, especially the international, where you have to face up against the Eastern teams and also be able to dip into your Western counterparts as well. And I think that that's now been proven kind of false, that the Eastern scene isn't as strong as we think. They aren't unbeatable. The Western scene has been able to play a lot of tournaments, and we've worked really, really hard growing our Dota. And especially the Europeans, have just done fantastically so far. I mean, Na'Vi and Alliance, obviously the big kings of the Dota scene right now. And just the very idea of LGD was, I think, a little bit of a misstep. If they picked up a team that was already, doing well in the Western scene, it was like, hey, do you guys want to come over to China? Something like that. But just picking up individual players, I never expected LGDN to do well, even though I am big fans of some of those players, and I hope that they do get a chance to do well. Rattlesnake and VP, VP suffering. I never expected them to do well either, but their performance has really been extremely lackluster. I expected at least 4 or 5 games of wins, but going 3-11 is pretty sad, especially when you have that wild card matchup. And Rattlesnake, I mean, no surprise, when you have the wild card matchup, they didn't get invited for a reason. I think they are going to be a really strong team, potential invite for TI4, but it's no surprise that they're not doing well in their group stage. They're probably going to get knocked out in the first 1 or 2 rounds.
El Prez, any notes on these 3 teams? Any expectations?
If you had asked me, I completely agree with the Capitals. If I had to say which teams I thought were going to do the worst in Group B, these are the 3 teams. I think LGDN, while they had a really strong showing for the first G League, they just haven't had that same momentum since, and that might have just been part of the whole honeymoon type deal as a team. Honestly, I feel like LGD, they have a huge predictability factor. Like, they first started off doing all this dual roaming core type deal, and now they kind of transition out of that, but the execution isn't as strong as it used to be. And I don't think God is really the greatest mid either. That might get a couple of shots fired there, but I don't know. It's like, as a team, I didn't really expect LGD to get very far. Rattlesnake was the wild card team. I don't think anyone expected them to get very far. And BP has the same kind of consistency issues. They have a pretty all-star lineup, don't get me wrong. They have Light of Heaven, but no, wait.
No.
Light of Heaven's on Empire.
Arzard.
Yeah, it's Arzard that's on Earth. I get my Russian teams confused sometimes. But they have Arzard, who's a fantastic support, but honestly, just a star-studded lineup isn't enough, as we saw from Moscow 5 last year.
Yeah, that's a good point. And guys, after this break, we're going to go ahead and talk about the playoff stages, the winners bracket and the losers bracket. Of course, winners bracket, best of 3, so there's some wiggle room, but losers bracket, wow, those are difficult. Best of 1s. So we'll go ahead and preview those matches for you after the break. Be sure to stay tuned. This is the Roundtable. Stick with us.